Good morning, everybody, and sorry for a little bit of the delay. We're still having some technical difficulties, but I wanted to welcome all of our guests, our donors and friends and panelists to our first webinar of 2021, a conversation on the critical role of libraries in promoting literacy and equity across communities in the United States. Before we get started, I'd be remiss if I didn't wish you all a very happy Black History Month, a time to honor and celebrate the incredible contributions of Black Americans to our collective history in this country. And to that end, so many of those contributions were about really building democracy and building equity and justice for all. Unfortunately, today we are still as a country living out and trying to fulfill that promise. And we know that equity and social justice issues still remain today, and libraries are such a huge part of helping to part of the solution. And for us at the Barbara Bush Foundation, we believe literacy is truly the key to lives of equity and dignity for all Americans, and we'll continue to fight for that in our work each and every day, and we thank you for joining us in that fight. We also know that throughout our history, that literacy and libraries have played a very key role in the fight for equity. In fact, I just want to quickly highlight 3 Black women of literacy: Harriet Jacobs, Susan Taylor, and Satima Clark, who all 3 used literacy as a path to freedom for Black Americans and for themselves, because they all taught many Blacks to learn to read during their time. I encourage you to go to our website. We have a whole series and we're highlighting their lives and legacies of literacy. So please see our website. 3 incredibly extraordinary women. And frankly, when we think about libraries and storytelling, their stories have not been told. So I urge you all to learn more about those 3 incredible women. And speaking of extraordinary women, one of the best on the planet who represents us in our country, I am thrilled and honored to welcome the 14th Librarian of Congress, Dr. Carla Hayden. She was appointed in 2016 by President Barack Obama and is the first woman ever to lead the Library of Congress. The Library. It's been a lot. When I was doing my graduate school work at Johns Hopkins, in fact, it was the only place, thank goodness I lived in Washington, because I could get the books I needed for my master's. Those halls and those place in my heart. I don't think I've ever shared that with you, but good memories in Madison Building. I also want to welcome Tracie Hall, who is still part of but Tracie is the executive director, newly appointed executive director of the American Library Association. She leads the oldest and largest library association in the world. And Tracie, before she stepped in her role, had various roles in libraries, literally coast to coast, from Seattle to Queens. And prior to that, she was at the Joyce Foundation. So again, honored and privileged to have Tracie and Dr. Hayden join us today. Before I get started, just a few interesting points, Dr. Hayden, before I kick it off with some of our questions, is libraries have played such an incredible role in truly in the founding of this country. And they hold a special place in our history. It's really what I would deem as critical social infrastructure. They are safe spaces. They are free. To this day, from the late 1800s to the 1960s to today, they are still really the only free service that we have. They are trustworthy. We can go there and feel like it's a trusted source. Libraries even were born out of social clubs and informational clubs during Jim Crow era and the civil rights movement. They provided communities with information on literacy and anti-lynching. So just helping communities struggle with the issues or the trials and tribulations of the day. Very remarkable. I also don't think people are aware of the role libraries played in the civil rights movement. When we talk about equity and justice today, they were critical pillars literally in the middle of the fight for civil rights in this country prior to the 1964 Civil Rights Act. In fact, there's some interesting stories about Jesse Jackson in Greenville, South Carolina. As a young boy, he went into the library and he was He was kicked out and arrested. In Mississippi, there was a couple of young kids, grade school kids, three of them who tried to pull out a philosophy book and they were kicked out. And then there's numerous stories. But it was important because it began this kind of the tip of the iceberg. And I think this is another story that hasn't been written of how libraries were a critical part during the Civil Rights Act, developing the Civil Rights Act, and in particular, the public accommodations piece of that. Because libraries, some of them, even though Mr. Carnegie paid for them, still Blacks were not allowed to use them. Right. In Richmond, they decided that, we're not even going to build them because we don't want Blacks to come. And then there was funding from Carnegie across the South. There were a handful, about a half a dozen or so, that were built in the South just for Blacks. Very special places, and really are core to the founding of our democracy and our society. And so much so that I know in '64, after the public accommodations section, that libraries were even given funding from the federal government to support what they called poor services, because you had that deep impact, that footprint at the community level. And so that sort of backdrop leads me to our conversation today and having both of you with us. And so with that, Dr. Hayden, I think, education and learning are foundational to our society and to our country. And libraries have played this critical role in how we have accumulated and shared wealth. Can you talk to us a little bit about the role of libraries, continuing sort of these points around the history in our country, why they have been so relevant and why they're still relevant and critical today?
It was so important that you mentioned the fact that libraries as a vehicle for informed citizenry, that was the main part of making sure that there were free public libraries. It was around the same time, 1870s, after the Civil War, with universal education, that there was the aspect of the recognition of the importance of libraries being free for all, you can get it, and that the denial of serving people of color in libraries was a demonstration of their importance and was pivotal to, for instance, Congressman John Lewis has talked about one of his earliest experiences was being rejected from a public library. And you had numerous stories that the fact that this system that's unique really to the United States and other countries have emulated this idea of having public libraries free to all were also recognized as the key to information, opportunity. And Frederick Douglass, and while we're in Black History Month, it's important to think about why February was selected. It was Carter G. Woodson's thought that you would celebrate Frederick Douglass's birthday and Abraham Lincoln's. And Frederick Douglass famously said, "Once you learn to read, you'll be forever free." So this opportunity to go into a place, a safe place, and to take out and read anything, it was acknowledged, especially over this country's history, that by providing that, you were providing opportunity.
Absolutely. Dr. Hayden, we lost your video. It was perfect a minute ago, but we just lost your beautiful face.
How's that?
There we go. I got to see you.
And I hope we talk about the impact of technology now that we're doing this, and That's libraries right. and what they've been doing to make sure that that equal opportunity and access to technology during this time has been critical, and libraries have stepped up to the plate in
That's right.
tremendous ways.
Yes. Well, let me jump to that question. I had let me just flip to that. I remember. This tells you how old I am, but I remember the card catalog to find my books, Dr. Hayden, and the smell of it and all of that, good memories from childhood. But now some of those are things of the past, and thanks to technology. And maybe you could speak to how technology has really helped accelerate this place of libraries, and or has it helped hinder it? And if so, can you tell us about what's going on and what you're excited about around technology and how you see it moving the agenda forward?
And I hope that when Tracie Hall gets on too, she'll be able to give even more information about what public libraries in particular are doing right now when people need them so much. Because what technology has allowed libraries to do, including the Library of Congress, is broaden their reach. You mentioned in the introduction that the Library of Congress is the largest in the world. Well, that's true. However, if the materials aren't available through technology, it limits their use to on-site. And so a major push has been digitizing materials, and it's an issue. And libraries in general have been the conduit for so many people in urban areas that might not have internet access. And it has been brought into stark relief during this past year. Think about the fact when most people need what libraries have been providing: online internet, high-speed internet access, all of these things. And to be physically closed during this time has been heartbreaking for so many librarians. And I know I can speak for them, because they would have been the physical place that people would go to for the virtual learning, all of the different things that suddenly had become even more critical during this time. Libraries, though, have stepped up and have provided all types of technology services. Those bookmobiles, and I'm sure a lot of the people listening, just like you mentioned the card catalogs, they remember the bookmobiles. Well, their mobile services have been going into areas and being that internet connectivity for communities, pulling up into parking lots, going into communities and providing the internet access. And just recently, the Enoch Pratt Free Library in Baltimore, and I love it, and had been part of it, received a grant to put a special technology on top of the branch library so that they could provide internet access for 50 families in the community.
Wow.
So you have libraries that are loaning hotspots to families. So just like you could pick up a book, with the drop-off curbside service, you could go and get a hotspot. So you have the connectivity. So libraries, if there are even drones, some libraries are using to drop books off into community. So there are all kinds of creative ways that libraries have used technology, and it has helped them help communities when they need it the most.
I mean, that's just terrific. I think that's a concrete example of being, I like to say, not just not just in the community, but of the community. Libraries recognizing those critical needs as they've done for hundreds of years in supporting the community. And to me, that's an issue of equity. That's leveling the playing field when they can be used as platforms to help the community.
And especially with, the Barbara Bush Foundation has been very involved with early childhood literacy and helping families and new parents. And libraries have been partners in that effort. For instance, working with the pediatric societies and being there before babies are born with kits, and you get your first card and your access when the baby is born, and having all of these things, and teaching and helping caregivers and parents with literacy activities and knowing what you can do. Require a lot of technology or is prohibitive because of a person's circumstance. For instance, going to a grocery store. There are a lot of literacy activities that you can do in a grocery store. So being able to provide these tips and resources for the earliest learners. And my favorite is to make it fun too. With literacy, sometimes we concentrate so much on, and you have to, the skill and the deciphering and things, but also and fun and the joy of reading and literacy.
Yeah. That's right. And you know, I think Barbara Bush said that the parent is the child's first and best teacher. And so that's why those in the early years, libraries are so important to young parents. You know, Dr. Hayden, we think about kind of what's going on in our society right now, and you just gave us a great example, is COVID has exacerbated all of this. You know, how are our libraries overall, from your perspective, how are they faring during the pandemic? You gave us an example of how they're responding, but are there other examples around how programs and services are adapting that you want to share? And then, you know, I'll perhaps tie that to, again, they're bridging sort of these equity gaps in communities, and they're providing equitable services, but they also help us level the playing field, you know, so I'd love your thoughts around that.
Think about the young people in communities, that 3 or 4 young people in a home, and now it's virtual learning. Libraries have, and with all the safety precautions and when the conditions allow, have turned their meeting rooms and their auditoriums and their spaces into virtual learning hubs, connecting with the education systems and districts. And so that's where the young people can to do their virtual learning, and having community volunteers that help them, because as we all know, and you mentioned the what Mrs. Bush said, the first teacher, a lot of parents and caregivers are appreciating what teachers do. Yes. And being that, but to have a guide by the side while that's happening is important. They're also putting on virtual story times, showcasing what resources are available for teachers who were also thrown suddenly into the virtual learning environment, and also might not have had the equipment at home to do the lesson plans or make the connectivity. We are very fortunate we're able to have people help, but think about teachers themselves. And so and they have families. And they might have children that are doing the virtual learning. So libraries have been stepping in and being that resource, being that place where people can pick up materials. They're also extending their services similar to what they've done in the past with summer reading programs. The food that services that are missing when children are not able to be in a physical school. Libraries are being the drop-off places for that too. And so when the kids are there, the food service that would have been provided in the school. We also have librarians doing what they do best too, providing that reference and resource and service. They're virus detectives. And in San Francisco, a lot of the library staff members who are not providing direct public service because the physical library is closed are helping with the COVID tracing. And they're very good at it, you know, librarians, we like to, and so they are doing that. So there are all types of ways that libraries, library staff members are stepping in, being part of the community, and providing and being that place. Libraries have been called opportunity centers. And during this time, they realize that they are more critical than ever with helping young people with their learning.
Amazing, amazing. I mean, I would sum that up. Libraries are truly helping what we would say, breaking that multi-generational cycle of low literacy and poverty. And those examples are fantastic. Of the innovation that's happening because of COVID, but that libraries are this gold mine that as a country, maybe we haven't fully tapped into in new ways.
And the new ways, before the pandemic, libraries were doing a lot of innovative things. For instance, checking out musical instruments. You could check out a sewing machine. There's a library in Ohio that has a whole section beyond books, traffic cones. And that one kind of threw me for a minute. Like, what are you, the library with traffic cones? Think you're teaching your young person to drive, or you have construction.
Wow.
Being responsive to what a community might need. And during this time, libraries have expanded their services to loan 3D printers and all types of things to help with the technology, iPads, all of those things as well. So it's more than books, and also it's recognizing, and I think Tracie Hall is coming in now because Tracie has been working in the American Library Association. I have to, full disclosure, I'm a longtime member and have been a part of it for so long. We have a dynamic person, Tracie Hall, who's leading us now with the Library Association, and she can really tell you how the libraries have, and the people who
There's a lot of
support
pressure
them
here
have
because she's
joined
now
together to advocate for libraries being part of any relief bills and things that are being proposed to help communities during this time.
Perfect. Do we have, I don't think do we have Tracie yet? I think she's.
So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have Charlotte unmute.
Hi, Tracie, are you there? No, okay. We will.
Well, when she comes in, I really hope you mention and have her talk about what the library community is doing to make sure that they're part of the recovery and recognizes that they're doing all of these things, but they need the assistance and funding too, because it's an extra part of what they're doing. To loan these materials, you've got to have them.
That's right. And I think Dr. Hayden, you know, that's part of the broader point and why we connected this issue together, or we see a through line, so that there's an ecosystem that you have to create at the community level, state level, and then ultimately nationally. And ALA plays a huge role in being a core part of that ecosystem, not on the sideline, to your point, but integrated into that. And so support, that means resources, that means extra sets of hands, that means partnering. And that's one of the reasons why we're so excited to have both of you today, is that we're looking forward to partnering with Tracie around some free materials and resources that we can provide to her network as we see ourselves as part of that ecosystem, and ultimately kind of fulfilling, I like to say, the unfinished business of our country. So I think that's spot on, and I will definitely bring that back. So continuing down this line, Dr. Hayden, we have seen, and I've spoken with Tracie about this, there are closures of libraries. One of the things that I was alluding to when we look at the history of libraries are level, and this picks up on your point. And, you know, the first thing, you know, county council or city council, they want to cut the library budget. But that's exactly what we don't want to do, because they are so critical. And just, you know, you talk to us about the impact that's having, or what you're hearing, or what can we all do about this if it's happening in our community, because we want to make sure that this ecosystem and this learning not only stays intact, but frankly grows in the future.
As a citizen, and I'm sure many of us share this, I want the police department, the fire department, all of the different services that are municipal and county services. As a citizen, you want that. However, it's just as important if you have the school system to have that public library system, that ecosystem as part of it. After the children leave school, they go to public libraries. That is part of the continuum. And to be seen as an essential social service, education service, is critical. And when you close libraries, you are closing opportunity, not just for the young people, it's for the people getting on computers to register. E-government coming, where are people going to go? when they need to, for instance, find where the vaccine, if you've had to do that recently, and get online and have the time to do that if you don't have that access. So considering libraries, when you think about that ecosystem of support in communities, is what advocacy the Library Association does, and make sure that they're at the table when these issues are being addressed, that libraries are seen as critical, not just a place to get the bestseller. That's wonderful.
Right.
That's a good thing. How libraries.
Right. So sorry for the technical difficulties, but we understand you are on the line and you've joined us by phone. I'm going to let you pick up on that. I think you heard that last few bits there, but I know that you and I have spoken about the impact of closures on libraries and what that's going to do to our school system. We'd love you to join the conversation on this point.
Yes, absolutely. Can you hear me okay?
Yes,
Oh,
thanks.
yeah.
Yes, good morning, everyone. And I just want to say what's very humbling about trying to get in is that in that moment, I had an experience that is similar to our workers and students across the country. Who are, many of whom, especially low-income residents, who have the same struggle that I just experienced for almost an hour now, and have that every day of their lives. We know that households, especially households that are headed by Black, Indigenous, people of color, lower income workers where there might be low educational attainment, people who live in rural areas or who live in communities where there is urban density but decaying infrastructure, have the same experience. We know that at any given time, there are 23% of Americans who are not online at all. Either they don't have the affordance of the devices, they don't have access to the platforms, which is why the American Library Association is pushing for universal broadband, and which is why the American Library Association's Council just a month ago declared access to broadband as a human right. So I just wanted to start because I believe that everything happens for a reason. And as frustrated as I was, I needed to collect myself and know that what was so interesting as we talk about literacy today, which is both reading literacy as well as digital literacy and access, that I was having the experience that I was going to be talking about. But this is why we need libraries, because libraries are the single institution in this country, the single institution in this country that works to ensure that we are bridging those gaps, and for whom that is our mission statement. So as Dr. Hayden was saying, and as she represented her career and the work she's doing at the Library of Congress, we know that during this time, we've seen increases in some cities from Chicago to North Carolina. We have seen into DC, we have seen increases in library card usage, as well as ebooks and in digital materials. We've seen librarians offer story times online, take adult basic education classes online. And when I was at Queens Library, the second largest provider of adult basic education. So we are seeing libraries adapt. That's what we do. That is what we do. And we were early adopters and adapters and fighters for access to the internet. But where I think we need to go now is the kind of stewardship that I think the Barbara Bush Foundation represents. We need people in communities, we need advocates to fight for libraries. This is a time where we need expansion, not only of services, but of financial support.
Absolutely.
Partnerships, and Tracie, I'm so glad you mentioned the partnerships and working together and realizing that there are different lanes, but we can all be on the same track and pushing together. You have strength in numbers, and when you have the different groups working together, it helps an ALA to have that push.
Absolutely. And, you know, Tracie, I think the follow on, and I'm not sure if you were on when Dr. Hayden and I were talking about this, but your work and your members is so critical. We were talking about COVID and the impact of COVID currently on the country as a whole, obviously libraries, but this community, I said earlier that you are not just in the community, you are of the community. And that is, you're playing this critical role in the response and the recovery. Can you talk to us about some of the things that you're doing at ALA? We'd love to hear more from you about that. You know, what's happening on the ground as part of that recovery. And you need money for that, and you need sets of hands and all of the above. And so we want to hear more about that. And for us, we're particularly noted your point about adult basic education at Queens, at the library that you are at. That is critical. Mrs. Bush always said the parent is the child's first and best teacher, and we have data from H that backs that up. But we've got to take care of the whole family unit, and libraries can play a key role. We need to all understand that as a country. So I'd love to hear you talk about your role in the recovery. Thanks, Tracie.
Yes, absolutely. Let me just start there with that focus on parents as effective first teachers. One of the things that we really want to track when we have this conversation about what libraries are doing is I want to speak about how libraries are moving the needle. And one of those areas that we're really, really focusing on is economic mobility and educational persistence during this time. What we should recognize, and I know that all of us listening probably know this, but when we think about poverty, especially generational poverty, we want to think about head of household income. And usually, head of household income is going to be a predictor of two types of things. One is literacy, because of literacy as is defined by educational access, especially empathetic, resonant, and accountable education. The link there then is that it begets, again, another cycle of economic and educational attainment. So if we were to make, and this is a theory that I am studying right now in my own research, if we were to make single investments in heads of households, especially heads of households in lower income households and lower income communities who have school age children, if we were to support their reskilling, because so many jobs are going remote or digital or hybrid at best. When we think about digital access, we already know how many people are going to be left out of that cycle, right? So Deutsche Bank just issued a study in September of last year that said that Black and Latino households alone were about 80% underprepared for the jobs of 2045 if we did not focus on reskilling in the area of literacy, especially digital literacy. So some of the things we're doing at the American Library Association that I'm really proud about, we are home to the Association of Library Services for Children, ALS, and a big initiative that they launched last year and is going strong now is called Look to Libraries, which was created so that parents, especially of small children who are now without support of maybe Head Starts or preschools, et cetera, can become directly engaged in early education and early literacy. And the program is outstanding, and I'm looking forward to sharing those resources. As well, school libraries where we need massive investment. In my own 20-year career in as a librarian, we have really seen, mass disinvestment in school libraries, and we know that school libraries are the connection point in the schools to support teachers, and especially have been extremely important in getting teachers ready to teach online. And at the same time that that's happening, we're seeing funds taking away from school media programs. So with the American Association of School Librarians, which is also part of the ALA canopy, we are working directly to counter that. We sent a letter just recently to Dr. Jill Biden because of her commitment to education, asking for ongoing support for school media library programs and to support school librarians. What are we doing? We're seeing our librarians offer story time directly into homes. We're seeing librarians take English language programs directly. There's a lot of mobility and agility that's happening right now in the library sector.
That's terrific. I'm thrilled to hear that. And I think there's a lot of people on this Zoom with us today, so on this WebEx. So I'm glad you were able to share that, and I want people to be mindful that there is this critical role, Tracie and Dr. Hayden, around breaking those, as you ticked and tied so beautifully, breaking these kind of multi-generational, that this is inextricably linked with income and investment in the family. And I don't believe you can bring, you say that baby's not ready for school. That teacher has a kid that arrives that hasn't been read to. That child has very low vocabulary when they get to second and third grade. And we all know that the Black and brown boys are not, 80% of them across the United States are not on grade level reading. And so you got to go upstream. Absolutely. And that's the point that you're making, Tracie, and it's critical. And that's what we're fighting for right now. This link between literacy and the economy. We did a study last year with Gallup. We believe it's the first ever study with Gallup, where we found that the US is losing approximately $2.2 trillion every year, or approximately 10% of our GDP, due to low literacy in this country. And that is a multi-generational situation. You're typically in a multi-generational household that is challenged by literacy issues. And so we've got to look at this full circle. And I love your look to libraries. And you know this, but we can't wait to work with you, because we are on the same page. But I digress. Now back to
that's not digressing.
Good, thank you, Dr. Hayden. More on this. So I think one of the questions I'll ask you both is, we talked a little bit about the response to the current situation and recovery, but what are folks, and maybe this is tied together. I come out of a global health background, as I think you both know. Not only is it a safe space, whether you have to do government or go online to register for your vaccine, but what are there other instances of how they're using libraries? I've heard in my background that health is one of the most searched. Tell me about, I've been diagnosed with breast cancer, or I have diabetes, or whatever.
Yes.
Where are you finding now, either in COVID or even before, what's that core one or two things that you're seeing from people that they're searching for that you know about? Tracie, maybe you can kick us off.
Yeah, absolutely. So something that is really important to think about is school business is actually, in addition to thinking about how people are continuing their education, especially we're seeing that happening with adults who are doing their own continuing education. So we talked about adult basic education, but also entrepreneurship. We know that many of our community residents who own small businesses, that might be single proprietor or family run businesses, also seek out library services. And we are seeing that continue to happen. We are also seeing a lot of programs happen where people are not necessarily being able to go into the library as much, because a third of all library visits are to use digital devices, or to use computers, or to access email, or to do job searching. So job searching, especially now, is an area where people are seeking out the library. And where we are really responding to that is by loaning hotspots. We're seeing the loaning of hotspots or to devices to households, or for time-bound periods, just continuing to escalate. And as well, people are visiting the library building, because so many libraries are opening up their Wi-Fi, allowing that to be 24 hours, and making sure that people can park in their car or sit near in a socially distanced manner and access Wi-Fi. So those continue to be areas where we're seeing a lot of traction, a lot of small business support, a lot of people visiting because they really need to find new jobs. And then again, continuing education, whether that be basic education, post-secondary education, as well as K-12 education. And many people are just eating. Ebooks are skyrocketing. We see a lot of increase there. I mean, just even in the first 3 months of the pandemic, by June, we have seen a 67% increase in ebook usage in some communities, and in some cases, 300%, depending on where you are.
Wow. Tracie, I'm going to push, forgive me, Dr. Hayden, I'm going to push her a little bit more on technology. I think you and I want to more from her on technology. There's the plus and the negative side of it, right? The getting online and, struggling with your kid and the thing bouncing off, just your own struggle there, Tracie, that you mentioned. But, can you speak a little bit more where you see technology being more of this equalizer and us and libraries helping ensure that it's an equalizer? Can you talk a little bit about your kind of prediction of the future around technology? And then I want to tie that to, we're doubling down on technology and our investment. Our founder, before she passed away, said, we're not making enough of a dent into this low literacy issue that families or that's happening to families in America today. And she believed in her last few years of life that we needed to use technology to accelerate the good work that many people are doing. And so we want to be able to have products, tools, resources that we can give to the entire community, whether that's through the library platform or other platforms, that people can learn to read, or as you were saying, increase their upskilling for jobs. Absolutely critical. That's exactly why we did the Gallup study report. But we're going to want to have those services for free, of course, but love to know your thoughts, particularly for adults. There's shame and stigma around not being able to learn.
Yeah.
And I'd love your thoughts on technology and how we overcome shame and stigma and some of these barriers, and how that library platform can help us with building this out. Tracie.
Well, oh, British, we're going to need a part two, because I'll say this just on technology, and I really want to commend Dr. Hayden at the Library of Congress, because right away she reminded us that the Library of Congress is the people's library. We are going to need to have a new approach to technology in which we think of technology as our societal accelerator, right? It is just an accelerator. It expedites messages. But right now, if you were to ask me what my prediction is, if we do not change our orientation towards technology, because right now it is considered a luxury for those who can afford it, I think that my prediction is quite dire. If we think about who's excluded from the internet, I said, according to Pew Research, that does a lot of study in this area, 23% of people are not using the internet regularly enough to be a part of its community. 10% are not using it at all. And you can imagine that the poorer the household, the less likely they are to have not only access, because access is just a part of it, to actually have the digital skills to become someone who can actually use it, not only to take in information, but to create content, because that's the kind of agency that we need, right? Or to demand a certain level of representation. Right now, we are going to have to hold each other, and we're going to need to hold big tech accountable, because I think there are, right now, let's think about what three areas of society are we most reliant on for access to technology today? Work, education, and health. Each of these are, in terms of lifetime outcomes, each of these are the definers of what quality of life is for most people. And the fact that we are so reliant on technology, knowing that there is a disparity that is just so huge when it comes to people of color, poor folks, people in decaying communities like suburbs as well as rural areas. But I talk about suburbs because we overlook suburbs. But suburbs that are majority people of color have levels of hidden poverty, especially around technology, that we, even in philanthropy, we haven't focused on, and we're going to need to do better there. But right now, I think just as I believe that technology is an accelerator, it can either accelerate decline or progress. And we have to make the choice of how we will use it. And we are going to have to, I believe, in the next 5 years, we're going to need to launch a massive initiative in which libraries serve as a co-navigator of information in communities where there is a noted information gap. That is what I think right now we at ALA, we're saying, let our legacy be justice. As we get ready to turn 150 years. And I think the justice, I believe today that digital inequity, digital disparity is the civil rights issue of our time. And I will close by saying what you said. I think people kind of get this salient as they near the end of life. Just as Barbara Bush said, wanted to focus on technology, so did Major Owens, Representative Major Owens, before he died. Close to the end of his career, he said, and I read a lot of his work, he said, I would like to devote the next 2 years of my life to thinking about the impact of technology on our young people, because if they don't have access, we will have to pay. Those words, no more salient words have been spoken in terms of he foresaw, I believe, as did Barbara Bush, where we are today, that we would be reliant on technology for education, employment, and healthcare.
And
I'm going to
Tracie,
say amen to all that. And Dr. Hayden, I'll let you pick
well,
up on
I'm
this
just
and
really
we'll close it out.
so glad that you mentioned that. And also the age disparity. When you think about the here and now, what just happened, having seniors, and I'm in that group, trying to get online to register to get a vaccine. And the stories that we have heard about the seniors that one didn't have the skills, much less the equipment, and had to call younger relatives, and the frustration. That is a real life example. And libraries have been having classes for seniors, safe and secure classes for seniors to up their skills, but also to have that access point. So Tracie, ALA is doing it and needs to be that main voice for libraries as we move forward.
Absolutely. One last question for you both, because you're two of the most prominent libraries in the country, and I can't let you go without saying, what's the last book you read, or what are you both reading now? And I heard about all the, ebooks and that sort of thing, but I like good old fashioned hardback books, I gotta say. So to close us out, Dr. Hayden, you want to start?
Well, I'll start. The last book I've read is Cast by Isabel Wilkinson, which gives you such a perspective on what is going on now. And then something for work. It's called A Place for Everything, The Curious History of Alphabetical Order. But as I said earlier, fun. I love mysteries, and this is by an African-American author, and it's called A Deadly Inside Scoop. It's got mystery and food, and so that's the one I'm looking forward to.
Wonderful. I will have to get that last one, Dr. Hayden. Thank you. Tracie, how about yourself?
So for work, I'm reading Managing Transitions. I love a good sort of, I love sort of organizational development and change management. And so I'm reading that book and it's wonderful. But a book that I'm holding it up like you can see me.
Yay!
It is Black Futures by Kimberly
Yay!
Drew and Jenna Wortham, which is such an amazing book about cultural production amongst, I think, the millennial generation. There's some Generation X, but contemporary Black cultural production, because when I want to get excited, when I want to see the future, I look to artists. And there are so many librarians who have also been artists, such as Audre Lorde, right? A writer. So I'm really inspired by the creativity in the field. And when I want to get excited and think about the future, I've been turning into this visual masterpiece called Black Futures.
Wonderful. Well, I mean, everybody, we're all going to run out and buy all of those books. And again, I am so grateful and honored to have you both on our first webinar of 2021. I want to thank you both and all of our viewers, and we'll have this online. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.